So Kyiv is not going to fall. Odessa is not going to fall. Kharkiv is not going to fall.
Nope.
People are suffering. People are dying. I can't imagine how unbearable it is to actually try to get through your daily life in Ukraine with all these interruptions.
Hello. Our guest this week on The Edge is an online influencer who goes by the name Jake Broe. And while war still remains very much a kinetic activity and is about taking and holding territory in real life, increasingly there's a new front line, a virtual one. By using open source intelligence and by having access to enormous audiences through social media such as YouTube, audiences that Jake refers to as defenders. More and more people are getting their information from these independent outlets. Since the full-scale invasion began, Jake has been providing regular updates and keeping awareness up about what is happening here in Ukraine. He's also been keeping up awareness and providing support for the Ukrainian cause. As such, he is a perfect person to talk to about this new Frontline online. So, Jake, thank you for taking the time out. You've become quite the phenomenon or the phenomena on online, a voice for Ukraine, recognizable. It's been great watching. But I want to go back a little bit into your story. You were a nuclear and missile operations officer for the Air Force for 6 years. You were in uniform? You were in service?
Yep. I served for 6 years as an officer on active duty.
Well, thank you for your service. And we'll circle back around to that perhaps when we talk about what that expertise can lend to our current conversation. But tell me, what happens when you leave the service and you started doing financial vlogging? Was that correct?
I started my YouTube channel about 5 years ago while I was in the service. And at the time I was just stationed and living in North Dakota, a small town near the Canadian border called Minot. And I was just looking for a hobby. There was some other finance YouTubers I was following at the time, and one of them made a video how to get your first 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. I love YouTube. I mean, I've been on YouTube since day one of the platform, watching cat videos and part of it all. And I just wanted to be part of it. I just thought it would be cool if I could hit that 1,000 threshold, get monetized, and somehow was making like $1 a day, after a month.
Yeah,
if I can make $30, that'd pay for a dinner. So I just took it as a personal challenge, and I had no expectations of ever getting big or having a massive following. I just got sucked into the analytics and the experimentation. How can I improve? How can I get more views? How can I just connect with more people? And by the time I separated, so I separated from the Air Force in February of 2022. Right. Okay. I was at 80,000. Yeah. I was at 80,000 subscribers, making about 3 videos a week talking about investing or personal finance topics. The biggest story in the world was Russia's full-scale invasion. I made like a one-off video just giving my reaction to the news. This was the top story in the world. That video got 3 times my normal views. And I just kind of was alternating between my old content and talking about the war. But my channel doubled in size within 2 months, and I realized I had more subscribers wanting my thoughts and opinions on the invasion as opposed to talking about credit card sign-up bonuses and trading options. So I pivoted, and I had no intention of being a military blogger. I don't like that term, but I'm here now and I'm doing it, I guess.
Well, from my perspective, I'm an old traditional media guy. I used to be a producer for CBS News and CNN and an on-air reporter occasionally. So if I have a criticism of my former vocation, it is that I think they've let their audiences down, especially when it comes to this war, this conflict. So it doesn't surprise me terribly that there was an appetite for an alternative, because I am very critical of what the news organizations, my former employers, my former colleagues are doing the best they can in the game, that in the parameters that they're given. But you have a further reach than some of the big boys do, and that's
on
this
YouTube,
presence on YouTube.
On YouTube, my views are more consistent than Tucker Carlson.
Amazing, isn't it?
I understand Tucker Carlson has views on X and views on his personal site, but just on YouTube, I mean, I'm right up there with like Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I welcome it. Frankly, I welcome it. It's been really great watching your stuff, because what I've been trying to do, and I've been here since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. I've been coming to Ukraine for 20 years and all the rest of it. What I've been trying to do is do in-depth coverage, more substantive stuff. And I haven't been doing the daily updates of like, this is what's happening, we're reviewing this, we're reviewing that. So to see guys like you who are doing it responsibly, because I think there are some people out there who are doing it irresponsibly, has been great to watch. So I gotta ask what the learning curve has been like for you, because you're a military man. You have some expertise in that area, obviously with the nuclear missile stuff, because Russia being a nuclear power, I'm sure you have some insights there. But learning about Russia and the conflict and the history, and that has to have been kind of a sharp learning curve for you. How's that been? Kind of
I enjoy learning.
In this.
I've read a couple books. If I can find a documentary, I'll watch it. I'm pretty much on YouTube constantly trying to better myself and learn. So 2.5 years ago, I was not the guy. I should not have been the guy talking about this war every single day. I didn't know anything. But now I am the guy. Like, if you can always make yourself a SME. That's a military term for subject matter expert. So 2.5 years ago, I was not the guy.
I love the military's acronyms. I used to do embeds all the time when I was in Iraq and Afghanistan, and there's something about the military and their acronyms. They love a good acronym. A SME.
Everything.
So you're now a SME.
Yes. Everything is an acronym in the military.
It's always been so fascinating to me to be a conflict reporter and kind of looking in, having close ties and spending a lot of time in the military, but always being an outsider looking in. And so I do catch some of these things and be like, that's weird for a civilian to see, but perfectly normal in the military. So, but anyhow, so you became a SME, and you have been consuming so much of this stuff, whether it's open source intel, or whether it's monitoring Russian media with the help of media monitor and things like that. I got to ask you, for somebody who probably didn't consume much Russian television in your prior life, how's that been? Like absorbing some of the weirdness that comes out of the Russian media machine.
I lived in South Korea for 6 years, so I'm very familiar and comfortable living in other people's languages and cultures, and I understand everyone's different. The most complicated structure in the universe known to man is the human brain. And the human brain can take on so many different forms based on inputs and their surroundings. So I understand there's this flavor that the Russians have on state TV. That's their language, their culture, their history. But I don't think it's real. I don't think it's genuine. When I watch these clips of Kremlin state TV, it's an artificial construct. You're seeing what only the Kremlin approves. So it's not even a true reflection of who the Russian people actually are. So I actually think that's a travesty. So what I'm seeing, in these clips from Russian Media Monitor, it's like this mirror universe, this dystopian projection coming from the Kremlin, and to me, it's creepy as hell. And I'm looking forward to the day where the entire apparatus is destroyed, and we can get a real representation of Russian language, Russian culture, Russian history, free from the constraints of what Putin has imposed on the Russian nation.
And a divergence of opinion, because right now,
yeah,
they pretty much are all in lockstep. I mean, I was living in Moscow when Vladimir Putin rose to power. One of the first things he did was take control of media. He knocked off a satirical puppet program, very much similar to Spitting Image in the UK, if you're familiar with that old comedy show. They had one in Russia. One of the first things he did was he got rid of that show. So yeah. Vladimir Putin, big bad Vladimir Putin, was afraid of a bunch of puppets because they poked fun at him. He had to control the media. And now, 20 plus years down the road, we are seeing people like Solovyev and Simonian and these kind of people who are, you're absolutely right. They can look at the same object that any other person would look at. And that, it's the old dress, this meme, the dress meme that came out about a year and a half, 2 years ago, where it's like some people looked at it and it was blue and some people looked at it and it was silver sort of thing. That's what they do on Russian media. But it's for somebody who isn't acclimatized to it at first, I'm sure you are by now, that must have been a bit like stepping into Bizarro land.
I don't see much of a difference between Kremlin State TV and clips I saw of Bill O'Reilly and, the height of Fox
point.
News and their propaganda.
This is 100% a valid point. Yeah.
I mean,
it's similar.
When I listen to Solovyev, honestly, he just reminds me of Rush Limbaugh. So it's just, not very different.
Let's talk a little bit, another aspect of Russian media or Russian information warfare, which I would say some of their media platforms, whether it's television or not, there's clearly an information war going on based out of Russia, out of the GRU, the Russian military intelligence. You being an online presence, you must see this all the time as well. The Russian bots, or somebody who's actually on a keyboard at the in a venue somewhere in Petersburg or Moscow with dozens if not hundreds around him, but putting out stuff that's similar. But you have to have been victim, or you must have had attacks or been approached or seen this kind of information warfare. What's that like? What's that been like for you during this period?
I didn't understand what modern Russian disinformation and propaganda was until the last 2 years, really. The disinformation campaigns they've been putting out, they've been going on, I think, since 2012, as soon as Putin came back after Dmitry Medvedev swapped him out. But Vlad Vexler, who has a YouTube channel that's pretty popular, I recommend you have him on as well. He perfectly explained to me what exactly the modern form of Russian propaganda is. Because during the old Soviet times, it was all about utopianism. We're just going to lie about everything until we figure out how to make it true. So everyone knew that the old Soviet Union was terrible, but they all had to pretend like it was this glorious paradise. And, the expression, we know they're lying, they know we know they're lying, we know they know we know we're lying, or whatever. Putin, when he came back, said we can't do that again. It's too obvious. So the new form of Russian disinformation and propaganda is just to exhaust people, to just blast out noise to the point where people believe we'll never know what the truth is. The more conspiracy theories you can kick out there, the more mud you can toss in the water, the better. The goal of the Kremlin today is to just exhaust people so they stop paying attention. They give up. And there's so many people that I talk to and encounter that are this way now. They say, it's so confusing. I'll never know what's true. Are there Nazis in Ukraine? People keep saying there's Nazis in Ukraine. Why would people keep saying there's Nazis in Ukraine unless maybe there are a lot of Nazis in Ukraine? when I get these kind of comments or these people who talk like this, I'm not going to engage with them. I found my peace on social media years ago, where I know that in the comment section nobody changes their mind. People want to scream into the void, go ahead and get into thread arguments on Twitter or whatever, but I put out almost 2 hours of content a week. That's my opportunity to persuade people or change their minds. It's not in the comment section. So I never engage with bots or trolls, and I tell my supporters, don't engage with these people. Either they're not real, either it's a server farm in, China or St. Petersburg, or it's a seriously confused person who's an idiot, and they might come around someday, but it's not going to be because of you. So that's my attitude.
You're a better man than me. I get my blood starts to boil and I get sucked in. I know I shouldn't, but no, I hear you 100%. It's just not worth engaging, especially with the way the platform is nowadays. Have you ever heard the story of a guy by the name of Michael Lessin?
Maybe. No, I don't think so.
Okay. Michael Lessin. Take a look it up. He was Putin's basically his media guru. He was the one that orchestrated Vladimir Putin's messaging, his appearances, and all the rest of it as he rose to power. He was the original editor-in-chief at Russia Today, RT. And he's kind of was the architect of what it is you're describing there, that you don't have to have a truth. You just have to have so much noise out there that there is no truth and there's no solid footing upon which to stand upon. And he was kind of the architect to that. Now, it's interesting, and I urge you and anybody who's watching this discussion to look up Michael Lessin, because right in the run-up to the 2016 election, he came to Washington, D.C., and the scuttlebutt is he was going to go down to Langley. He never made it to Langley. He was found dead in his hotel apartment with his skull bashed in. Washington police have subsequently said that it was because of alcoholism, and that he passed out and all this kind of stuff. Highly suspicious. And I don't like to engage in conspiracy theories, but it does send up some alarms for me, having studied Russia for so long, and the fact that in the run-up to the 2016 election, this guy comes in, the architect of the disinformation that you're describing, and he ends up never actually making it to his meeting because he's found dead. So, Michael Lessin, do look it up. But you're absolutely right in general there that that people need to be very careful about the information that they're consuming, and they have a responsibility to also consume information responsibly. That's my little soapbox moment.
My response is just to be relentless. I have to keep pumping out my noise, my narrative, my truth. And people, if they want to take refuge with my videos, that's what people tell me in the comment section. They say, Jake, your videos help me remain sane, because they're getting so much crazy information, crazy opinions from so many different places. I try to filter what I find on the internet and simplify it so that people can understand. And if that's a way I can serve a higher purpose, contributing to this war effort, then I will keep sitting at my keyboard every day, making 3 or 4 videos a week, doing my best.
There's a lot of ways to support and help Ukraine, and one of them is doing what you're doing. So, those of us who do consume your information and what you put out there are very thankful for it, because it is difficult. It is and if you the one thing also, and I'm sure you would agree, is that for an audience member who maybe is concerned about this disinformation stuff, is if you read something that elicits a very strong instant emotional response, take a second, take a breath, find a second source, confirm before you have this visceral emotional response, because that's the intent, is to overwhelm information with emotion, is to elicit this strong emotional response. And that's how they hook you in with false information. I don't know if
Well, and
that gels with what you're saying.
social media amplifies it. The platforms,
100%.
Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, not so much YouTube, but for the instant reaction social media microblogging platforms, outrage drives engagement. So the algorithm rewards outrageous posts that trigger your emotions, because you respond to that, you hate tweet that, you retweet, you quote tweet, you start getting into arguments. So it's too easy. We need to completely rethink and restructure how we allow information in. I understand freedom of speech is important, but it's obvious what authoritarian governments are trying to do. I would love to see some kind of reciprocity rule where if Twitter is banned in China and Russia, why are government officials from China and Russia allowed to be on Twitter? If the governments say that their own people can't even look at this platform, why does Dmitry Medvedev have a gray check mark next to his name? Why is the CCP allowed to have official government accounts whose only purpose is to deliver propaganda to Western audiences? So I understand this might be a fantasy, but I would love to see some kind of government action or government policy. It's probably got to come from the EU because Congress is worthless. But if you have banned this platform in your country, your government officials aren't allowed to be on it in our country.
Because there's no other purpose for you to be on those platforms except to sow disharmony and
they're not trying to put out information to their own people because their own people can't see it.
And this is a tool that the KGB back during the Cold War in the Soviet Union would have loved to have had the ability to reach as many people as quickly as they do, with as strong a structured and a planned out disinformation campaign, because they study the Russians study us more than they study anybody else in the world. They are obsessed, as I'm sure as you've studied Russia in the last period here, you've probably come to be aware of this as well. They're obsessed with America as their sole primary enemy, and so they act accordingly. I mean, it's been said by the likes of General Hodges or other people, we're at war with Russia. Maybe we don't like that fact. Maybe it's not because of what we are not engaging in warcraft against Russia, but certainly the Russians consider themselves at war and are acting accordingly. They see us as a direct enemy, and so to have access to an audience like that is a great advantage to them, considering there. So I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. Now, I can't have you on, Jake, and not talk about this amazing thing that happened this year for your milestone 40th birthday. Congratulations, a little delayed, but congratulations on turning 40. I'm a little bit longer in the tooth, but I remember my 40th and that being a big day, but I didn't do anything like what you did. You put out a fundraiser for your 40th birthday, and you have received over $1 million from supporters in this fundraising drive, which I find absolutely amazing, and I'm so thankful for. I know a lot of Ukrainians are as well here on the ground. What has that experience been like for you?
There was a different charity called Charity Water. I saw this YouTube video explaining the idea of donating your birthday. So I watched this YouTube video a couple weeks ago. I knew my birthday was coming up. A nice round number, 40. So that helps. And I set the bar low, and I said I'd like to fundraise $40,000 for my 40th birthday. That's enough for 2 trucks with the 69th Sniffing Brigade. They can purchase them, fix them up, deliver them. But my secret goal was always like 100,000. And my wildest dream goal was maybe 200,000. That would have already been the largest fundraising campaign that the 69th Sniffing Brigade has ever done. But then it just exploded. I have a very large audience. Hundreds of thousands of people watch my videos. close to 16,000 people by the end of it did donate. So even then, it's a very small fraction of people who actually participated. It could have gone even higher. But I never ask for money in my videos. I've mentioned other fundraising campaigns, but I've never been the spokesperson for a campaign before. Plus, it was my birthday, so there were all these different factors that kind of brought it together, and people responded absolutely incredibly. Once it was over 500,000, everyone had the same idea. We got to push it to that seventh digit. We're not going to stop at 800,000. Like, we got to get that seventh digit. So NAFO and a bunch of cartoon dogs, started spreading it and saying this is a big deal. And I never would. I don't know if you caught this. I mentioned it in a video, but of this 1.2 million we fundraised, $30,000 of it is going to have to be spent on patches with my face, because almost 3,000 people donated the 110 to get a NAFO patch. And the idea that 3,000 people are going to soon have a patch with my face on it in their home somewhere is not something that wasn't on my 2024 bingo board. So.
Well, I think it's fantastic. And how's it been going aside from the patches, utilizing that money? I mean, I've seen we're looking at Jeeps. We're looking at getting, some. I mean, well,
the allocation, 600,000 for 30 trucks. It's about 20,000 per truck, purchased and fixed up. And then the rest is being spent on drones. The standard FPV, but also the $5,000 thermal camera Maverick drones. So the guys at the 69th are handling all. I mean, as soon as the money was coming in, they were already spending it to buy drones and to find trucks. It's going to take them probably 2 months to do all the work that's required. They still have other fundraisers they do and other trucks they're buying. So they were over the moon. They were ecstatic. They're past 100% capacity at the moment. So we're going to let them digest all the funds and do the work they got to do. But as soon as they have spare capacity, we can launch another fundraiser.
Wow, that's fantastic. Great job. So we're going to start to kind of circle around here towards a conclusion, but let's talk a little bit about the conflict itself. Again, let me bring in your expertise as a former Air Force nuke and missile officer. There's a lot of concern about Russia's nuclear capability, obviously, and they saber rattle all the time when it comes to their nukes. And I think that's been one of the primary reasons why the West has maybe been so reluctant to their whole escalation concerns, is because they don't want to provoke some sort of nuclear response. As a former member of the Air Force, nuclear missile program officer, what is your take on that whole nuclear threat from Russia?
I've talked about this extensively in that there's no benefit to Russia using a nuclear weapon. That's the threat. But I'll give you the top 2 reasons. I made a dedicated video with like 10 different reasons why it's a bad idea. But the top 2 is the only reason why Putin is still alive, why some Western intelligence agency isn't trying to assassinate him, is because the West thinks he's a rational actor who won't use nukes. That's a pretty low bar. But when you think about Dmitry Ukin or Prigozhin's Thunder Run to Moscow, would they restrain themselves and never use a nuke for any reason? So the fear is Putin is killed somehow, somebody replaces him, and that person is not a rational actor, and that person will try to use a nuclear weapon somewhere, somehow. So if Putin uses a nuke, the reason for keeping him alive is gone. And if he starts nuking cities, well, he's got to pick his favorite command bunker, go underground, and he'll never see the surface again. If he ever comes to the surface, a Hellfire missile will be waiting for his motorcade. So that's number 1 reason why Putin won't use a nuke. The number 2 is he doesn't know how the other nuclear powers would react, specifically India and China. India and China have already told him, stop talking about nukes, you're not allowed to use a nuke. And all they have to do is participate in economic sanctions, and that's lights out for the Russian economy. Those 2 reasons alone are good enough, and that's why in 2.5 years of Russia failing at this war, constantly talking about nukes, they've never used one, and they're not going to.
Yeah. Once you do it, it's what is the moment after you use a nuke, we're in a whole different
Well,
situation.
Anders Puck Nielsen made a pretty good video as well. This was like a month ago.
Yes.
He's a Danish naval officer, and his top argument was, how does Putin explain that to his people? When you say the war is going well and you're winning and NATO's on the ropes and you're about to defeat NATO and you nuke Kharkiv or whatever, well, you got to go on television and explain to your people why you decided to nuke Kharkiv. And how do you give that speech to the Russian people from a position of strength? I mean, if your conventional forces were incapable of achieving the goals of the special military operation, and you had to use a nuke, that makes you look pretty weak. That makes you look pretty desperate. So I like that argument as well. You can't make the argument that we had to use this nuclear weapon from a position of strength. You would only use that from out of desperation.
Yeah, and as we were withdrawing from Iraq or Afghanistan, or when those wars were going badly for us, we never, proposed nuking Baghdad or Kabul. I think the story goes, I think that even the one time that it was proposed by MacArthur in Korea, that's what Truman withdrew him because of that. I mean, we generally don't go for nukes, and we don't saber rattle with nukes. But the Russians do regularly. And so that does kind of lead me to my next question to you is, from your perception of consuming all of this raw data and this open source intelligence and what you do as opposed to what I do, which is kind of like more, you consume a lot of information. They're saber rattling, I contend, because things are not going well for them on the battlefield. And they're not going to get better with 61, or with the 6.1 billion coming, and F-16s are going to be in the air soon. Now there's talks of potential trainers being here. Now they can shoot into Russia. That authorization is coming stronger and stronger. What's your perception of how things are going on the ground, on the battlefield here in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, as far as saber rattling, Russia did that on day one, day two.
Yeah, true.
There's an RT article. Russia basically raised the equivalent of their DEFCON on day two of the war. To them, they were still going to take the capital city of Kyiv, but so the war wasn't going bad for them yet. There was no record yet, but they were already saber rattling because they know it works. They know it deters people in the West. There was a German officer who was arrested last month for basically espionage. But when they interviewed him, he said he was doing it because he was scared of a nuclear war, that Russia would actually do it. Jake Sullivan has constantly undermined the war effort or held back on capabilities and aid for fear of a nuclear war. So they do it because it works. Maybe not at the top, but there are military advisors, civilian advisors, where that's their number one concern because Russia keeps talking about it. So as far as my opinion on today, what's happening on the battlefields, we just found out that this last month, May, was the deadliest month of the war for Russian forces. These are Ukraine's own self-reported numbers, so even if Ukraine is overcounting, it doesn't matter. The trend is the same. Like, you can look at the monthly casualty reported numbers, and there was a huge spike in May. Two factors: Russia's foolish reinvasion of the Kharkiv region. I'm convinced they rushed in before they were ready. They were probably planning for a June reinvasion, a summer offensive, but they were trying to beat the delivery of military aid from the United States. Congress passed the $60 billion aid package in April, and that's the second factor why May was the deadliest month of this war for the Russians. It works. If you give Ukraine the weapons and the ammunition they need, they can smash these Russian forces. And Russia's really doing the West a favor by just sending their troops to die every day in these failed meat assaults.
Yeah.
I'm convinced Russia doesn't know how they advance other than taking absurdly high casualties, but it's a lot easier to eliminate all these Russian forces when they keep foolishly attacking into artillery, drones, and mines.
Yeah, the thing I have started to say when I talk to audiences who are curious about this conflict and about the sheer numbers of casualties that the Russians are sustaining is that, I mean, they're showing that they have this capacity to absorb all of these loss in terms of their soldiers' lives. And they have a historical record of that. What they don't, what really gets to them is their loss of prestige or a strategic positioning. And so that's why I have started to say that I don't know whether there is a threshold number in which the Russian people would say enough. But it is the matter of we're willing to spend these lives as long as we have as long as we are restored to our great place on the global stage, where empire is restored. And so, it might not be the amount of soldiers that Ukraine or the West, supplied weapons and all the rest of it have to do, but rather to show the Russian population that despite the cost that you're enduring, you're also not going to restore that empire. So if we can put Crimea on the table as really putting it under threat, which I think you and I will both agree is a possibility with the either the ATACMS or the HIMARS or what have you, taking out the bridge, and then the land bridge being susceptible to artillery or F-16s, that if the Russians are losing all these people, which they're willing clearly to sustain those losses, although I'm sure that's being obscured to the public, they will suck up that pain. They will, like a sponge. That's what Russia does militarily historically. But if we can put something tangible at risk and say you're losing all these people, but in addition to that, you're not getting back the empire that you want to reacquire. So that's kind of my position on it, having studied this region for 25 years or so and having spent my fair time in war zones as well. I don't know. Have you gotten that perception that, have you picked up that messaging from, what you're seeing from the Russians?
Couple points. It's not a number. It's not how many people are the Russians willing to lose. It's who are the Russians willing to lose.
Yes.
So Putin is doing everything he can to protect the power base. He needs for things to be calm in Moscow and St. Petersburg. So if you're the child of, some middle bureaucrat in Moscow and St. Petersburg, Putin's probably protecting your child. Putin and his inner circle are doing everything to protect the core territories because that's the place you need to remain stable. So if millions of people die from all these small villages across Siberia and central Russia, it's not going to cause turmoil in Moscow and St. Petersburg. There's not going to be mass rioting. It's only when Putin starts coming for their kids that things could change. Concerning Russia wanting their empire back, I'm convinced that this is what the entire war in Ukraine is about. It's about great power status and are you being respected? If the United States wanted to change the government of Colombia through military force, Russia wouldn't care. So the Russians and the Chinese, going back 20 years ago, said, oh, we're not at the end of history. We still are doing great power status events. The United States wants to go into Iraq and change the government through force. Okay, I guess that's the world we live in. But that means as the regional hegemons, China in the Far East, Russia in Eastern Europe and the Caucasus, we have the right to replace governments that we don't like. This is our sphere of influence. The other nuclear powers need to stay out of it. So this war in Ukraine is Russia saying Ukraine is ours, Ukraine will always be ours. What's wrong with the United States? Why are they getting involved? We didn't interfere with what they did in Iraq 20 years ago. So that's what this war is about. Russia feels they've been disrespected. They don't believe that any of the countries on their border have the right to self-determination. And Russia is saying we're not going to accept this lower tier status, on par with Spain. Russia has basically the same size economy as Spain, Yeah. To Spain.
I saw NVIDIA, the computer graphics outfit seems to have a larger...
the market cap of NVIDIA is now larger than the GDP of Russia. Yeah, Russia sucks. I mean, their economy sucks.
It does. It so does. It's just crazy, isn't it?
They're never going to get better when their culture pumps at them that they're already superior to everyone else in the world. Like you can't get better unless you've been humbled, unless you accept there's something wrong with our society.
Need to lose. This is a war of empire and colony, and as the great Yale professor Timothy Snyder says, is in the end, it's actually best for an imperial power to lose a war of colonization, because then they have to look internally and make the changes that are necessary in their own societies.
Well, Gary Kasparov is an exile living in the UK, and every day on Twitter he's saying, "Don't fear the collapse of Russia. I'm Russian. We need Russia to collapse before we can rebuild, restart, and free the Russian people of this." I mean, it's a burden. Being an empire.
I saw
it
in the 90s. In this window of opportunity they had after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But they just kicked the can down the road. They know the changes they need to make in their own society. Trust me, I've been studying this region for a long time. I lived in Moscow. They know. It's just the transformations that need to be made are so difficult that they're reluctant to do it. They have, by bringing in Putin and kind of returning to this very autocratic system, they've kicked the can down the road. And maybe it will be this loss in Ukraine that'll make them finally look in the mirror. At least we certainly can hope. So look, Jake, we are I am sure running up against a potential blackout here in Kiev, as we've been having blackouts because of the Russians attacking the energy infrastructure here, which more affects civilians more than any military structure. So I'm going to try and wrap it up here with you, but I want to give you the opportunity to. I know nobody has a crystal ball, and war is very fickle. But if you had to guess, how do you think things are going to go? We're looking at another transition with the money coming in and the new weapon systems coming in. Where do you think this war is going?
Eventually, we're going to exhaust Russia's reserves of everything, and they're going to financially collapse. And once they're financially collapsed, they're going to be begging the West for help. I think Putin will be dead at this point, and they're not going to get any sanctions relief. They're not going to get any foreign aid unless they pull out of the occupied territories, to include Crimea. So for the Ukrainians, it's a war of attrition. Every day they just have to out-ratio the Russians by a factor of greater than 3-1. I mean, in the Kharkiv region, because Russia's so bad at war, I mean, they're out-ratioing 8-1. But Ukraine has to hold on. It's going to be painful. It's going to be brutal. But this is the price they're going to have to pay for their independence, their freedom, because once Putin's government collapses, Ukraine can finally get on a solid path to EU membership and NATO. But for the Russians, they have no future. They're already in a demographic crisis. Their economy is not great. I mean, it's a sugar rush at the moment. Uncle Vlad is making it rain everywhere with these $2,000 a month checks. It's pretty good stimulus. But those currency reserves are almost exhausted. Maybe another year or two tops. And we're currently in a global economic boom. The U.S. stock market's at an all-time high. China is spending like crazy to keep their economy up. So there will be a contraction. There will be a global recession at some point. I mean, this is just the normal economic cycle. They're inevitable. And the countries that will be devastated the most are countries like Russia, where they're already overexerting themselves, and they don't have access to the international bond markets, and no rational business person wants to take a risk on a country losing a war. So this winter is going to get bad. Nobody knows when it's going to happen, but I guarantee you at some point it will happen. We're 2.5 years into this war, and Russia hasn't even taken the entirety of the Donetsk Oblast. They haven't even taken the Donbass region. So Kyiv is not going to fall. Odessa's not going to fall. Kharkiv is not going to fall.
Nope.
People are suffering. People are dying. I can't imagine how unbearable it is to actually try to get through your daily life in Ukraine with all these interruptions. But just know...
And it makes planning your life, it robs you of your agency.
Yeah.
The suffering I've seen here of the Ukrainian people for no better reason other than Russia is feeling insecure and wants to restore its empire. I mean, say what you want about American adventurism around the globe with their military, but we never tried to turn Iraq or Afghanistan into the 51st state, and literally that's what Russia wants to do here. So it is tough, Jake. I will tell you that. It's very difficult. But I agree with you. They're not going to take these major cities, and they're not going to take, in particular, the capital or Odessa. And so much of this is wrapped up in their dominance in the Black Sea. And you can't, as important as Crimea is, you're going to have a strategic vulnerability if Odessa stays in Ukraine, and it's going to. I've been to Odessa many times during this war, and I can tell you, Jake, take my word for it here, and I got a couple vlogs up there, but just between you and me, I'll tell you, I've been down there. Odessans will never, Odessites as they like to be called, will never bend the knee to Moscow again, and neither will the people of Kharkiv. So this is all just a question of how many more people have to die, sadly. And it's I think you're 100% right. As we conclude, is there anything else you'd like to to mention that maybe we didn't touch upon before we call it a close and probably lose our lights?
There is a secret doomsday clock counting down every day for Putin's government and Russia. We don't know what the countdown clock is at, but it's going every single day. Russia will not come out on top in this war.
Yeah, tick-tock, Vladimir, tick-tock. All right, Jake, buddy, I'm so grateful for the time you've allotted for us, and I appreciate it so much. And I think, great job in what you're doing, providing the day-to-day nuts and bolts, coverage of the war has been a great asset to me. So I appreciate it, personally, and then also the money you've raised and the awareness you've raised is greatly appreciated. So, Jake Broe, we appreciate your time here on The Edge, and you're welcome back anytime, and it's been a great discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right.